But one of the key things that we did was to take all of the rules of content, has to be engaging, has to be inspiring, has to be entertaining, has to pull people in, has to have a narrative, has to build up, has to create tension, all this kind of stuff, have to have people who are good in front of camera, TV presenters, have to make it exciting. We just took all those rules of content and just applied them.
My name's Doug Gordon, and I'm a host of the show, Inspirational People, Inspirational Stories. Within the show is interview inspiring people who've either been successful in their field or inspired others' success in some form. Today's guest is Jonny Townsend. Jonny is a successful entrepreneur, mentor, and investor. Jonny was the co-founder of Circus Street, an award-winning online e-learning business that revolutionized the way global enterprise businesses were able to learn online. He went on to sell the business in a multi-million-dollar exit and is now helping and mentoring other business owners do the same as well. Having met him and got to know him, I have to say he really is a true inspiration and a pleasure to have on the show. Jonny, welcome to the show.
Hello, how are you?
Oh, it's a pleasure. Jonny, we obviously met through our good friend Joe, who used to head up Samson. He brought me into Samson actually a few years ago to do a speech. We've kept in touch ever since. And he mentioned about you being a true inspiration. And I have to say, having met you and got to know you a little bit, I have to agree. So I've got a few questions. And my first question, which I'm sure the audience would be intrigued to know, is because you started off as a financial advisor and then you went into telecom sales and then set up your own business in terms of Circus Street to become a multi-million-dollar business owner. Tell the audience a little bit about your journey and how you got to there.
Yeah, well, that's going back 35 years. So, as you say, I started in the financial advice, kind of life insurance industry, really because that they were the only people that were hiring at the time, and I lived in a mining town outside of a steel city, and this was what would it be, the early 90s. So there wasn't really a lot of work around. So, I kind of fell into my first ever sales role, and just kind of went for it, and was reasonably successful. I wouldn't say I was the best performing seller, but I wasn't the worst performing seller either. So I paid the bills. And eventually, once I built up an amount of experience, I moved into more salaried roles. And I ended up finding myself really I found myself out of work. I made one application to a company called Martin Doors, which later became BT Cellnet Mobile, and joined them first as a seller, then as a regional manager, then as a head of the SME business. Then I moved into T-Mobile, managed the national accounts teams, and various other companies, Thus PLC, and so on and so forth. And I moved my way through the ranks of commercial roles in the mobile industry first. And I ended up working for, and later on became MD for an e-learning business in the education sector, because mobile technology was starting to influence what you could do with learning. As in, you could take learning away from the desktop and put it onto mobile devices, etc. So I joined initially to give them some advice around the mobile sector and ended up running the business. And then eventually kind of said, well, I've moved my way up. This still doesn't seem to be enough. The next move has got to be setting up my own business. And I was very lucky to do that with my brother, actually. So we set up our business together. We grew it initially in the UK. After a while, we decided that we needed to take on this big behemoth called the United States. So between the two of us, my kids were older than my brother's kids, so it was down to me to move, because you can't really play at being in the US. You've got to jump in with both feet. We chose New York as a destination. It was unusual because I'd never been to New York. I didn't know anyone in New York. We didn't have any clients in New York. So it was really, that old Jerry Mouse in the Tom and Jerry movies where he's walking down Broadway with two suitcases looking up at the bright lights. I felt a little bit like that, kind of muddled my way through. We built up the business. I've been in the US for coming up to 10 years now. Initially in New York, and now I live out in Colorado. So that's a kind of potted history of 35 years in 35 seconds.
Love it, love it, love it. And what do you think was the main thing that differentiated Circus Street's learning system rather than to others and made you successful?
Well, one of the things we noticed in the whole e-learning sector, whether it be in education or corporate, was that for whatever reason, and there are some reasons behind it, but for whatever the reasons were, all of the rules of content that were everywhere else in the world that content was being produced were being ignored by the e-learning industry, right? So you would hear e-learning experts say the optimum time for people to learn in front of a screen in e-learning is 17 minutes or whatever, right? And what they were actually saying was e-learning is so bad that people can only take 17 minutes of it before they want to throw themselves out the window, right? And if you look at other methods of let's call it online learning where you're looking at a screen, I can't think of a single David Attenborough documentary that's less than an hour, right? At the time when we launched our business, the big movie in the theaters was Lincoln. Lincoln is basically a history lesson with Daniel Day-Lewis in it. It's 3.5 hours long. When I went to see it, nobody left the cinema, right? Everybody sat and absorbed all of this information for a very long time. And so all we really did, not all we did, but one of the key things that we did was to take all of the rules of content, has to be engaging, has to be inspiring, has to be entertaining, has to pull people in, has to have a narrative, has to build up, has to create tension, all this kind of stuff, have to have people who are good in front of camera, TV presenters, have to make it exciting. We just took all those rules of content and just applied them to e-learning. And what we produced was something where people said, oh, that's the secret sauce. You know, we used to get called the Netflix of learning because several customers would just go, they would go through a lesson and they would go, I'll just do one more, you know, and you get people binging on e-learning content, which had never been really seen before. So it was about that. It was about focusing on the learner. And it was about also thinking about what the customer was trying to achieve with the information and being able to articulate that that was the end result rather than getting people through lots and lots of learning.
I love it. And just a question just has come to me is, you know, obviously it was mainly based around large enterprise global businesses, but this day and age, there's so many people out there with content coming out, such as Tony Robbins and so on. Did you ever think about putting out publicly as well?
We did, but I mean, there's two areas to it. So do you put it out publicly and free, in which case, as a bootstrap business with no investment, set up by two lads from the north of England with no money, you go bust very quickly. And secondly, do you go out and just educate consumers? Well, what we were doing was really talking to large businesses about how to manage digital marketing strategies, and that doesn't necessarily translate to just the consumer. So I think one of the key things that we learn in business is have a strategy, give it a focus, and try not to deviate from it. There's lots of things in business as you set up a business, as you build a business. There's lots of shiny objects that come along. You know, an example. We were approached by multiple businesses over the year that were using our product that we were working with, who would say to us, "We'll pay you $1 million to build us a certain number of lessons in the style that you do it, but just for us." And it was really hard to do it. But every time a customer said that to us, we said no, because it was deviating from the strategy, which was build stuff that every business can use so you can build it once and you can sell it everywhere. And yes, there are all these shiny objects and cash cows and all this kind of stuff that might come in. The trick is to try and ignore them and stick to the strategy.
I love that because at least it keeps you focused and keeps everybody on board in terms of what you're trying to achieve. That's great. And in terms of one of the things I asked you offline, I still would love to know is obviously a big company could take on one particular module, I don't know what you called it, and then they could share the password or the profile across the whole company. How do you manage that to make sure that nobody takes advantage in that way?
Yeah, you can spend a lot of time worrying about it. And it's one of the first things that you start to think about when you build a license-based e-learning product. The reality is that you can't stop them doing it, really. But it's it's a business. The key thing to do is identify, certainly in our business, what we did is we said, okay, let's first of all start talking about the entire population of the potential learner base. And then you work with the client to get to a position where they actually buy licenses for everybody anyway, right? And so you kind of hoover everyone up by making the contract and the deal the right deal for that company. Without doubt, though, we would have clients who would sort of say, look, we'll buy 50 licenses, and you know damn well that there's 500 people in the business who could benefit from it. And you see a bit of a spike in usage, and you know, what are you going to do? You ring up the customer and say, are you sharing licenses? And they say no. But most customers that we found, most customers, and again, these are very large, you know, public organizations. They kind of play ball pretty well, in all honesty. I think if we'd have gone down the consumer route, you know, look at all the problems that Netflix have and Prime Video and all that kind of stuff. If we'd have gone down the consumer route, absolutely people would have shared licenses. It didn't really impact us that much, I've got to be honest with you. But you have to put it down as a problem, because sharing licenses, or whether or not a company shares licenses or not, that's not what's going to make you successful, ring fencing that 10% that might share licenses. What's going to make you successful is actually going out and selling it to a load more other people.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you said, you bootstrapped it, yourself and your brother, and yet the quality of the production was sky high, which obviously probably costs. How did you do that initially when you first started out in terms of the costs and managing it?
Yeah, we were really honest in the market and said, look, we've got this. It's currently this many modules. We are self-funding this business. Do you think you want to buy it? And you know, if the answer was yes, okay, sign up for a year's contract. By the time we hit a year, you will have this many modules available to you. We'll extend it by another 6 months. Here's the price. Pay us all the money up front.
Love it.
So we did. So basically, we just invoiced everyone and told them that they needed to pay us the money up front. And we were really honest with it. With the first few clients, we said, we can't build this thing unless you pay us. So people were really, you know, they wanted to see the product in their business. They understood us enough, because a lot of what we did was based on our own personal network. They understood us enough to be able to put their faith in us, and they leaned into it. And you know, we're very grateful, particularly to those early customers, for doing that.
Yeah, and on those early customers, I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of people out there in the e-learning business, or even me with my own online course. We'd all love to know is, you know, what kind of secret sauce in terms of sales and marketing strategies did you use with those early big customers to get them on board?
Well, as I say, a lot of it was to do with network. And the thing about what a lot of people in business need to understand is that there's your own network, but then there's the extension of that network, right? So as an example, when I moved to New York, like I said, I'd never been to New York. I didn't know anyone in New York. We didn't have any clients in New York. And so I went to my network and said, do you know anyone in New York? And most of them said, I don't know anyone in New York, right? So I would say, well, do you know anyone who knows anyone in New York? And they would say, I might do, yeah. And they would put me in touch with a couple of people. And then it's that kind of 7 degrees of separation between myself and Kevin Bacon, right? You're connected to everybody in some way or another. And so understanding that you can get to most people in the right way if you need to, and having a strategy to be able to do that is super important, because particularly in the US, where they don't have the same employment protections that we do in Europe. You know, I know several people who've worked for companies for 20 years, been super successful, and then have been told, there's a change in direction, here's your 2 weeks notice. And that's it. There's no redress. There's no process. It's just done, right? So understandably, whether it be in a big company or a business in the US, people are very risk averse. So having somebody that they know connecting them, just like Joe connected us, you know, we both know Joe for a long, long time.
Yep.
It removes a lot of that need to spend 6, 7, 8, 9 months building up trust and making sure that you're not some sort of shyster, right? And so that's part of the secret sauce, as well as having a great product and delivering on your promises. That's super important.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. And obviously your product itself was about digital marketing and everything like that. In terms of digital marketing, what did you do as a company to bring in more clients? What worked? What didn't work? And what did you also teach in terms of maybe just a few key tips on the e-learning business?
Do you know, I'm going to confess something weird at the moment. We didn't really do a lot of digital marketing or even marketing for the first probably 10 years. It was all about thinking how, if I'm doing and I'm using these names. I'm not saying we worked with these companies. I'm not saying we didn't work with these companies. I'm just using these names as examples. If you do a deal with Coca-Cola, there's probably a load of people in Coca-Cola that used to work for Pepsi, or a load of people in Pepsi that used to work for Coca-Cola. So there's a way to use your relationship with Coca-Cola to get into Pepsi. And if you get into Pepsi, you can get to Mountain Dew and Dr. Pepper Keurig and all this kind of stuff. So it's kind of understanding the links between the organizations that you're dealing with and the organizations that you want to deal with. And because we were focused on very, very large enterprise clients, big global clients, trying to get, multi-million dollar, multi-year deals with them, that was more effective than us just broadcasting a load of banners. There's a great phrase we used to use in one of our lessons. You're more likely to survive a plane crash than you are to click on a banner, right? On a banner ad, right? And so obviously you need a good search strategy. You need to be found. Obviously you need a way for people to access your website on whatever device that they're on. Obviously you need to be known and you need to make people aware of you. But human connection, particularly when you're selling to very large enterprises, is really, really important. And it kind of trumps everything, I think.
No, I totally agree with you. When I was in the investment world, I think the most success that I had was actually heart-to-heart connection with people, meeting people, spending time with people, getting to know people, introducing to the fund managers. And I think, like you say, I have a decent, social media presence, but I do find the most success I have in terms of sales is either speaking at a conference where I'm shaking hands with people, networking with people, and meeting people. So I absolutely love that. I really do. And it's great to hear, and it's a great lesson for a lot of the younger millennials out there or Gen Zs out there that might think, oh yeah, I can just put loads of things on the internet and I'm bound to get business, which it doesn't work that way. So yeah, that's really, really powerful tool. And obviously, I'm sure you've had some ups and downs during the years. What do you think were the kind of the biggest challenges that you came across as a business owner, growing in the business, and what did you learn, and what would you kind of think that really was useful in terms of the learnings now?
I mean, COVID was really tricky, obviously, but that wasn't unique to us. That was the whole world. I think part of being a founder and part of being an entrepreneur is you can decide whether or not you want to be brave. So I remember when COVID happened, all of our competitors were kind of broadcasting messages on social networks, like LinkedIn, etc., and on their websites and what have you. And they were kind of saying, look, we are just to let you know, we understand you're going through a hard time. We're working with our clients to make sure that they get through this. We're going to support them. We'll still be here. When you need us, let us know. We kind of did the opposite to that and went out to loads and loads of businesses and said, that e-commerce strategy that you thought was 9 years away, it's right now. You need to do something with it. Otherwise you're screwed. You need to buy our e-commerce lessons, right? So that was a deliberate attempt to kind of shake up the market and really, sounds a bit morbid, but to take advantage of the opportunity of the crisis almost and say, look, what brands really need to do now is think about how they can connect with people and sell to people now that they're not going into store. So at the same time, what we did, and a number of our competitors did something different. At the same time, whilst our competitors were going out and saying, okay, this looks like being 2 years minimum, let's cut costs, let's lay people off, let's close the doors in certain markets, etc. We went out and we just borrowed a load of money and went, we're confident we can ride this out, right? And so what we wanted to do was make sure that we didn't lose anybody, we didn't fire anybody, we continued to invest in the product, we continued to be aggressive out in the market. And I think that is it wasn't really a mistake, it was a brave decision for us to do things in a way that was different to our clients. So I feel as though all I've done is turn that into a positive, and that makes us look good. But I don't know if I have or not. But what I will say is that when you bootstrap a business, I think I've certainly, if you kind of count on one or two hands, I don't have enough fingers to be able to count how over the kind of 15 years that we were working in our business, we were very, very close, if not at the point of totally running out of money. Because as a small business owner, you are constantly managing cash flow versus EBITDA or anything like that. You're really focusing on the cash that's coming into your business. And it's quite a regular thing to get to a point where you're about to run out of cash. And you just got to, like Churchill said, when you're in hell, the only thing you can do is keep walking or walk through it, or whatever the quote is. And you just have to keep going.
I love that. And obviously it paid off at the end as well, which is great. And, in terms of, along the way, I'm sure you've had some guidance in terms of models or inspirations. It might be your brother, I don't know, it might be people you worked with. Who would you say has been the biggest kind of models or inspirations that have helped you along your path?
I think it's, I mean, I don't want to quote like big names like Steve Jobs and people like that, and business leaders who have got, multi-trillion-dollar organizations behind them. I really do think it was several of our customers that really helped us. They really championed us inside their businesses and really understood that what we were doing and what we could do for them would genuinely make a difference. And then the people that we worked with, particularly the senior team that we worked with, they were all they all brought something that we didn't see ourselves. So there's a woman called Sarah Gilchrist who joined us as a marketing consultant. And then when I went out to the US, I said, I was COO at the time. And when I went out to the US, I said, why don't you do this for a bit? And then when I come back in a couple of years, because that was the plan as well, and that went to toffee. But when I come back in a couple of years, I'll just come back into the COO role, and we can decide what you want to do from there. And actually, she took on the CEO role and did a miles better job than I was doing, and also brought a real focus on culture, and that built a business that everybody wanted to work at. And we wouldn't necessarily have gone down that route and done that. So the thing about success is what's the phrase? It has many fathers. And that can be twofold. It can be lots of people claiming that they were the reason why something worked. But I like to think of it as more to do with in order to become successful, you can't do it alone. It's the contribution of the people around you that actually help you get there. And obviously one of the things we did is made sure that we shared some of that success when it happened with those folks. So I would say definitely it's the people around you that can bring the magic. Somebody like, again, we talked about the product and focusing on content and applying the rules of content. And it was the design genius of a guy that worked with us, our very first employee called Paul Simon, who would not settle for less than perfection. Even when Richard and I were both saying, Paul, it's enough, he would go, it's not enough. We need to do this. And it's that level of excellence around you that just makes you far better than if you were doing it yourself.
Yeah, I love that. And you mentioned culture there, and I'd love to know a little bit, what was the differentiating factor about the culture within your organization that really made it a place to work for?
I think everybody felt valued and everybody felt heard. And we focused a lot on well-being. And our view was, hire really good people and then create the conditions where they can be as successful as they possibly can be, versus working for, and I know this from experience, working for very large organizations where you spend a lot of time churning out, presentations to tell people that don't really understand the business, what's going on in the business, and the fact that since you did the last presentation, there hasn't been a lot of movement, right? So you you spend a lot of time doing that versus, having the shackles taken off you and go and be as good as you can be. And what we were good at is, I think we were good at this, is, and this goes back to kind of early childhood experiences of our dad teaching us to swim, right? We went and had swimming lessons for something like 8 weeks. And eventually my dad said to my mom, "Can these lads swim yet or not?" And she said, "No, they've got to holding on to the side and kicking. Okay, I'll take them swimming. I'll take them to the next swimming lessons." And he took us up to the deep end. He just threw us in and said, "Swim." And you don't swim. You kind of half drowning, half thrashing towards the edge, and then you kind of get hauled out and you get thrown in again, right? And it's that level of letting people almost drown, but being there just to grab them if they need to be. But actually, that level, working on those margins is where you start to see a real improvement and real development in people, and that's one of the things that we did really well, as well as just making it a really great place to work. Really, lots of fun. Really great place to work.
Yeah, it sounds really good. And in terms of that, obviously, if you went back now and spoke to, because I know you started that business up in 2009, and if you were to speak to your younger self then, is there anything you tell him to do differently over the last few years?
Do differently, probably not, but have a certain understanding of things, yes. So I would say, and this is, I've said this to a few people that have started a business, and they've come up with a business plan. And a business plan, generally speaking, for the first 6 months, your business plan is a plan. After 6 months, that you should really call it a business guess, right? And I think that one of the things I noticed in our business, and I've seen in a lot of other businesses, whatever the business plan says, it will cost you twice as much, you'll make half as much money, and it'll take you 3 times as long, right? So I think that's advice that I would give to my younger, not that younger, but younger self, to say, look, this is all great and everything, but there's some hard yards ahead, and you're going to have to dig in. And this isn't going to be over in 4 or 5 years like you think it is. It's going to be a slog, right? But stick with it, because there'll be times when it's the most fun you can have with your clothes on, and there'll be times when it's absolutely awful. But stick with it, because it's a great thing to do, to create 100 and 200 jobs that weren't there, build an amazing product, go and deal with the world's largest companies, be talked of in hushed tones, and ultimately, come out of it with mission accomplished. That's a great thing to do.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And linked into that, but just different in terms of more about life in general. The Jonny of 18 years of age, would you tell him anything in terms of advice now that you know what you know?
Yeah, there's no substitute for hard work, right?
Yeah.
There isn't a way to shortcut this, right? There's I'm lucky in the sense that we built a business that we exited, and I'm now, much more financially secure than I was when I was 18, certainly, and certainly when we started the business. The reality is that 90% of businesses that start, most businesses are kind of exit after about 10 years. 90% of businesses that start will fail before 10 years. 90%, right? It's a 1 in 10 chance that you're actually going to get past 10 years when you start a business. So I would say to my younger self, there's no substitute for giving it absolutely everything. I used to play rugby, and one of the phrases we used to use in playing rugby, and you might have done this when you played hockey as well, is this phrase of make sure you leave everything on the pitch. so that when you come off, you couldn't play another minute, right? And it's that mentality of you got to leave everything on the pitch. Every single day, you got to leave everything on the pitch.
I love that. I'm doing a presentation next week, and I talk about the kind of the lessons that we learn from sport and why don't we use them all the time in business as well. So
Yeah.
that's
Well,
that's
sport's great because what sport really teaches you is that you all have a role to play. All of those roles together are more valuable than whatever talent that you've got. And actually, it's a really good idea to stay in your lane and do the bit that you're good at rather than thinking you can do everybody else's job as well. So it's a great lesson for working in business sport.
Yeah, 100%. And also it gives us a real kind of purpose to look forward to in terms of a goal each weekend. And I have to say, when I gave up hockey, I was kind of like bewildered about what I was going to do at the weekends
Right.
afterwards. And I think a lot of big sports guys who actually play professional sport feel it a really hard hit
Yeah.
when they first do that as well.
Yeah, they really do. They really do. And there's a great business actually that we got involved in, which is I can't remember the name of it because it was a long time ago when I knew them. Their entire business proposition was taking incredible world class athletes and introducing them into businesses. And I went to a couple of talks where I was starstruck by the people that were there. I won't tell you who they were, but I was starstruck by the people that were there who were saying, "Listen, this part of my career, this sports career, this playing in front of 80,000 people, that's finished. And so I've got nothing now other than whatever I do next." And that business was helping them translate what they'd learned on the sports field or whatever, or stadium or whatever, into business and giving them opportunities to work inside business, which I thought was fantastic.
Yeah, I love that. And just two more questions on the business, which I'd love to know, and they're a little bit selfishly about my own stuff. But is in terms of tips for course builders or people that have courses that are online, what would you say to help them become more successful in this competitive environment that we have now?
I think it depends on your audience, right? If you're teaching something to people who are themselves going out and actively searching for your content, then obviously making it as relevant as you can to whatever it is they're trying to achieve is super, super important. But when you're teaching customers like ours, what you have to recognize is that when you work with very large businesses, often learning products are bought by somebody that is kind of invisible in the organization to the learner and imposed upon that learner. And what the communication strategy is, all that stuff that you haven't got time to do already, here's something else, right?
Mm.
Here's something else that you don't necessarily see a value in. So in that instance, it's how do you create content that people will actually want to consume? And how do you do it in a way that people actually want to lean in and spend their time doing it? Because that's the big competitor that you've got out there for learning content in large corporates is the time of the learner to do stuff that has been imposed upon them. So that's what I'd say. Focus on the learner.
Love that. And talking of learning, I'm learning from you, and I do a lot of leadership development. And you're obviously a successful leader. Is there any other points that you haven't mentioned so far that you feel you had as an attribute yourself that made you a good leader?
I think connection with people, and recognizing that every individual is the main character in their story, right? And so connecting with that person and that individual on a human level is you don't build a relationship by firing out emails to say, we're 20% behind where we need to be in quota, work harder, right? You don't build a relationship like that. And what you don't build is you certainly don't build enthusiasm by that. In my experience, you build enthusiasm by connecting with people on an individual level and understanding what's important to them and why and how you can help them achieve it.
I love that. How did you do that when you're as busy as you probably were running the business, selling the business, managing the business? And then how did you get time to individually sit down with those people? And what did you say to them?
Well, you make time.
Yeah.
That's the thing. It's this idea that if you're running a business, if you set up your own business, you've probably worked in a number of companies and you've probably worked reasonably hard. You've never worked as hard as you're going to work when you set up your own business. It is all consuming. It's 24 hours. I can't remember. Well, I can now because I've stopped. But every single night, night after night after night after night, all I would do is dream about work. So I would get up, I would go to work, I would spend all day at work, I would finish the day at work, I would be checking emails, I'd be thinking about work, I'd go to bed and I'd go to work, right? And so it's all consuming. So you have to understand that there are certain things that are a priority. People in your business have got to be a priority, and you've got to make the time to connect with those individuals. And it's not necessarily that you have it's not like you have 30 questions that you're going to go and talk to every individual about. You just go and start talking to them, and the conversation goes from there, right? And the relationship goes from there as well.
I love that. And yeah, it's so true. I have to say with my own business, I do dream about it quite a lot,
Right.
which is never fun. And you find yourself going to bed at 3 o'clock in the morning, sometimes waking up at 8 o'clock in the morning and starting the same thing you're doing before. So, but it comes with the fun. But when you're doing something that you're, passionate and purposeful about, that can really keep the drive going.
Yeah.
And you like, obviously it's coming across here, and I've seen you offline as well. You have superb energy, and mental health and protecting your own energy these days is very important for people. How do you protect yours? How do you look after your mental health, your emotional health, to perform to the level that you have done in the past and now?
I mean, it's tricky. I've got to be honest, it is tricky. And, there have been times where I've thought to myself, I'm not doing myself any favors here, right? I think there are a number of things you can do. There's so I like pretty much every business leader that I know who's any good, no matter what age they are, no matter what region they're in, if they're a man or a woman, it doesn't really matter. One thing that I've seen in common with all successful business leaders is they suffer from imposter syndrome. And I suffer from imposter syndrome as well. And one of the things that I think held me back was addressing that, right? But I think the way that a lot of people address imposter syndrome is to say, I want to get rid of it. Actually, in business, it's kind of your best ally, because one of the reasons why people with imposter syndrome are so good is because they don't think they're good enough. So they're always trying to improve, and they're always trying to make something better. And as a result, they kind of always do, right? And then they deliver something, and they go into the next project, and everybody claps at the thing they've delivered. They go into the next project racked with imposter syndrome, and they go through the same kind of process again, right? So one of the big things that I did, and it was all around that, was go and get therapy. And I went through therapy for 2 or 3 years. And I don't think it necessarily helped me with imposter syndrome. But what it did do was help me with lots of other aspects of my life. And my wife, who I met when I moved to New York, and we've been together nearly 10 years now, said to me, the therapy helped you become somebody slightly different. And it was slightly better, and it was slightly easier, and it was slightly, you know what I mean? So I would think, take your mental health as seriously as you do your physical health. Loads of people will, I know a guy that runs, but I know several people actually that run triathlons, and you kind of go, yeah, but they're still going to end up having a nervous breakdown because they can't cope with the mental stress of doing stuff as well. So that's what I'd say is, don't be afraid of going out there and getting help.
Yeah, I totally agree. Did it myself. It really helped. I think the best leaders and the best performers in business are the ones that are most emotionally intelligent in terms of self-awareness and conscious communication, especially with your own self and everything like that. So it makes perfect sense. And, the imposter syndrome one, which you mentioned, which is really interesting because I still get that. And I often have to look at some of my old LinkedIn recommendations just to remind that I can still do the job.
Yeah.
And there's another guy actually I interviewed on here as well, very good friend of mine, Jack Daly. He has a trophy room. He lives over in San Diego. He has a trophy room. And I initially thought it was a bit of ego. And I said that to him. But he said to me, he said, no, Doug, it's because I get imposter syndrome. So I have the trophy room so I can walk in and read a few nice notes that people have sent to me, see a few trophies, and remind myself that even I've been doing this for 30 years, I'm worthy to do it.
Yeah.
So, and I think people, it does, like you say, it keeps you human. It keeps a bit of humility there. but it does keep you on your toes to try and self-improve. So I love that answer. It's absolutely brilliant. And we're running out of time. So I'd just like to, one of my last questions I like to ask is, in terms of yourself, imagining you are kind of 90 years of age or 95, or these days it might be 120 or whatever. We don't know how, the end of your life anyway. And you're put on a stage, and all the, the texts, the books, the interviews that you've ever done are taken away. What kind of 3 truths would you leave with the world in terms of messages of guidance and inspiration or legacy that you would have if you could put on that stage?
Oh, it's again, it goes back to the 18-year-old self. There is no substitute for hard work, right? That's the first thing. The second thing I would say is you have to focus on your health, physical as well as mental health. And the third thing I would say is, although I've spoken a lot about building a business with the people around me in that business, the real support comes from the people around you in your life, right? So I think about my wife, my kids, my brother, my parents. That's where you need to ensure that you don't forget the people around you in your life, because it's not just the people at work that help you get to where you are. It's really the people in life. And what the people in your life tend to play second fiddle, right? You tend to end up, you just end up treating people at work better than you treat your family. And so you have to watch out for that, right? You kind of bend over backwards for people at work. And then somebody in your family might say, I'm a little bit stressed out because you're always in a bad mood, and you just blow up, right? Rather than, how can I help resolve that, like you would do with work, So
absolutely, yeah. So many people do say. And what's next for you, Jonny? What's the future hold? I think I said to you when we met before, what's the third act?
I mean, it was all about the plan was all about retirement and all this kind of stuff, and we've probably been out of the business now for 2 months maybe. We're already starting to get involved in other little things and other little projects. So I would say that the future, or the now, isn't retirement. It's more semi-retirement. I certainly don't want to do what I did before, but I think why turn it off?
Yeah, you've got so much inspiration, so much knowledge, and so much experience that you can share with the world. It would be a shame to turn it off. Jonny, we've run out of time. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show, and I do wish you every success in this third act.
Thanks. And I hope the dog didn't ruin the audio. But, the dog's part of life. Embrace it.
Of course. I've got a dog myself, does the same. Jonny, it's been an absolute pleasure. My name's Doug Gordon, and you've been listening to Jonny Townsend on Inspirational People, Inspirational Stories. I'll be back next week with another inspirational guest. In the meantime, if you need to get in touch, please contact me at dougdgordon.com. From all of us here on the team of the show, I wish you a truly inspirational week and look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.